Next, we have Ethan Herisse. Ethan first garnered critical acclaim for his moving performance as young Yusef Salaam in Ava DuVernay's award-winning Netflix series When They See Us. Herisse was nominated for an NAACP award for his performance as one of the exonerated five. The limited series was honored by AFI as one of the best television programs of the year. Please welcome Ethan. And last but not least, we have Brandon Wilson. Brandon has just won the Gotham Award Breakthrough Award for Nickel Boys, which is based off the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by the same name. The historical drama was produced by Plan B for MGM and Orion, with Oscar-nominated RaMell Ross at the helm. Wilson made his debut in Warner Brothers' The Way Back, opposite Ben Affleck. Please welcome Brandon Wilson.
All right, good evening everyone. How are we feeling tonight? Yeah, I know it's also quite a very heavy film. Dede and I saw it last week at MGM, and we're just sitting in the car for like 2 minutes, just taking it in. And what I think was more profound was the fact that you adapted this from a book, and also based on a real life, based on true events that happened in Florida. I think that's a good place to start from. It's like, how did you feel when you got that material from Plan B, and how did you go about adapting it? Did you choose to take full liberties, or did you try to stay true to the source material?
Yeah. Thanks for staying, you all. So we get this book. Who's read Nickel Boys, the book? Oh, we've got one vocal and some other mutes, but that's okay. Sorry, that may have been inappropriate. So we get the book, Plan B. We get the book, Nickel Boys, and my co-writer and I, Joslyn Barnes, we of course read it, and we're pretty taken back by the power. And I think we're kind of unsure how to adapt it because, I think as most, large-scale literary feats, they have their own ecosystem of meaning and their symbols and their callbacks. It's relatively impossible to adapt something that is that efficient without leaving stuff out and maybe making the film feel a little bit too much in service to the thing that it came from. And so we made a pretty strong decision early on to distill the book to its essence, we called it, and then use that architecture just as its sort of story points, and then fill the rest with imagery and the poetry of looking from the perspectives of the characters, which I think allowed us to respect Colson's narrative and not make something too tethered to it to force that comparison.
Sweet. That's really profound because you mentioned poetry, because I think with materials like this, it's a tendency to tell it the same way it's been told before. I just really wanted to also dive deeper on poetry in Black cinema, and how you're also contributing to all the work that's been done in that, Judy Dash's work and everything. Is there a need to be able to tell Black stories in a certain way that you did say something that sometimes we're constantly looking at Black folks want to see things from the perspective, and how that informed the choices you made in terms of cinematography, for example. Just touch about Black poetry in Black cinema, and how that informed the choices you made for this film.
Yeah. So there's a pretty devastating relationship between people of color globally and the camera. It's not been as friendly as one, I guess, imagines it to be if you don't think critically about it. The camera is, I call it the technology of racism. It's part and parcel with the production of Blackness, which of course is scientifically a fiction, but has nonfiction consequences. And while that may sound like a grand claim, I think we know very well that one of the core uses of photography outside of general portraiture early on, as it replaced painting, was to sort of replace perception, right? You can go to a place you can photograph the place, and then you can take those images back to where you came from, and the other person kind of doesn't need to go now, and of course they do, but that process of using the camera inside Western Enlightenment ideology, which created this, bizarre hierarchy between cultures, tribes, other countries, and the scientific method, and the white gaze, which is sort of navel-gazing, self-fulfilling logical system about, intellectual superiority, one could say. You're getting these images from across the world, and then you're inclined by the ideology of the way in which it's interacted with the camera to think of those folks in a certain way, to think of them as third world, to think of their societies as less, or whatever. And so I'm interested in the photographic history of the historic South, because to me, this is the foundation of Black visuality. And with this, to make this film, the idea is to take the camera into the body and make it an organ, to not use the camera, though there are degrees to which this is true or not true, to not have the camera be so intensely objectifying, which is what it does. I think this guy, I know this photographer, Stephen Shore, talks about when he does his first intro class for students, he says that the camera is a monocular device. Human beings are binocular beings, right? Like we take two images, we collapse them in our heads, and we create something that has a little bit of depth. The camera creates relationships that don't exist, right? Like I can take a picture of this gentleman right here, and I can put that exit sign directly over your head and have those be on the same plane. I can equalize those, but that's a false relationship. So this relationship between the camera and Blackness has been a constant struggle. So the idea of the film was to use Colson's narrative and use images that are open-ended, images that are less easily consumed, images that don't have the utility of traditional narrative images. They don't have the utility of a lot of images that exist in archives, to have them be sort of open-ended, poetic experiences of the characters, and allow that to be your access to the world that they inhabit, not their relationship between getting to the points of the story which satisfy the narrative needs.
Really fantastic actors. I'm very curious where you found them, but I'll come to Ethan. We've seen you in When They See Us, and you've played very complex characters. What was your approach? First of all, what were you when you got to the call that you got the part? And how did you choose to approach this different from what you've done in the past?
Hey everyone, thanks for staying. Thanks for coming, and thanks for staying. I found out that I got the role. I was in an inorganic chemistry lecture, and my manager starts texting me, and she's like, "You need to get on the phone right now. This is an emergency." And I was like, "Oh, all right, that's scary." And we get on the phone. She's like, "Hold on, I'm getting your family on the line." I was like, "Okay, what's happening?" She gets everyone on the line, and then she tells me that I got the part, talked about it, jumped around, and then we hung up. I went back into the lecture and didn't take any notes because I knew I was not going to be coming back later that week. So yeah, that's how I found out. It was pretty wonderful, and there wasn't. I would say that maybe that there was a difference in my approach from in how I approached Elwood versus how I approached Yusuf for a few different reasons. One was when I auditioned for Yusuf, I was 17 years old, so I was just a different actor, performer, person then. I would like to think that I've grown a lot since then as an actor and a performer and a person. And another big difference is that Elwood is a fictional character and Yusuf Salom is a real person. So yeah, fortunately there were a lot of similarities, I guess, between the two, and them being really bright and loving and intelligent human beings. But yeah, my approach, it lied in trusting the words that RaMell and Joslyn wrote, diving into the novel and Colson's words, and just trying to be as truthful as possible when portraying Elwood.
Amazing, amazing, thank you. We're coming to you, Brandon. I think for me, what I really liked about Turner's character is, the camaraderie between both of them, Turner and Elwood. Sort of like see him start as a mentor, then become sort of like friends. I'm very curious, like bringing such vulnerabilities and how do you cultivate that friendship as actors, and also with RaMell. Do you want to touch a bit on that, on how you're able to develop that for us on screen?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's interesting you viewed Turner as a mentor in the beginning. I think. Yeah, I don't know if I felt. I think there's like so many different layers I think we've gotten to explore in doing some of these Q&As that I didn't consider when we made the film. I think one is that when he first meets Elwood is that there's this, excuse me, I shouldn't have like, there's like this desperate need for Turner to escape his loneliness. And I think finding Elwood in that moment is, and his response to that is very much a necessity and not, I think the mentorship aspect maybe comes from this idea that Turner has of like, knowing how the world works. He has this, he's more street smart, and he feels like he needs to kind of fix this naivete in Elwood. What's your question? Friendship. We met in the chemistry read, and it was, I'd say pretty immediate. We clicked, and it was easy.
Sweet, thank you. I'll come back to you, RaMell. We know your work in documentary. Hill County, done so much work in terms of like how, and we can see the style transition into narrative. And I'm sure that a lot of like film students that are trying to transition either from like documentary or producing into narrative, and also this being your first narrative feature. What were the things that were interesting about that transition? Were there habits that you had to drop in documentary that they work for screen? And what are the things that transferred easily?
Wait, who's seen Hill County this morning, this evening? Wow. Yes. Thanks. Shout out. It's interesting. I think, so I always use this as an example to like my entryway into making films in general, even photography. Jomo Frey, the wonderful DP, he says, we needed to do so much unlearning, right? Like he studied film at NYU. A lot of the other folks on set, like, were in the film world. I had no unlearning to do. I had only learning. I knew what I wanted to do, and then I'm confronted with someone saying, well, you're not supposed to do it that way, you're supposed to do it this way. And then I take what they're saying, and then think about it in relationship to what I want to do, and see if that kind of makes sense, And I say that because I don't make a distinction between documentary, nonfiction and fiction, and documentary and not documentary, unless only in terms of its categorization in the minds of the viewer. Because Hill County I started making, and I'm 3 years into it, and actually 4 years into it before I came in contact with this person who was mentoring the project, Rob Moss, and he asked me whether or not I want this to be, he's like, RaMell, do you want this to be a documentary, or do you want this to be an art piece? Now, just because it's a documentary doesn't mean it's not an art piece. Just because it's an art piece doesn't mean it's not a documentary. But where do you want this to sit in like the echelons of the world. And it took a lot of time to think about that. And I'm like, oh, the images that I'm making are of people of color in the community that I'm living in, and they're sort of open-ended and they're whimsical. There's a lot of, I like to say, strategic ambiguity. They're open to interpretation, right? And in that sense, the images that I'm making are sort of a Rorschach test for your relationship to Black people, to your relationship to those images. That's interesting in the documentary space. In the art space, that already exists. Like, artists have been working in that way, but if I can organize the film and employ the language of documentary, then, unlike any other thing in the world, when people go to encounter a documentary, they're predisposed to truth, right? Like, they're like, I'm going to be watching truth right now. It's just a weird thing that the documentary ethics have produced in society. And that way of viewing those guys, if I can get you to look at that as truth, then that's something, you know? So that's why that was a documentary. It's also still an art piece, like it can function in a gallery. So in making Nickel Boys, I'm not thinking fiction film, I'm thinking in the same way as Hill County, power of the image. Like how to actually use the power of the image. And I go look at the Dozier document, that's like this 150-page document, and it's like a forensic account, and you look at those portraits and you're like, there's nothing more powerful than the portrait of this boy. We're gonna be making all these images, but like the truth of this image, what we know happened, imbued in this thing, the history of it's nothing more powerful. So am I gonna like be making images the whole time and not use that? Like that just doesn't make any sense, you know? Why would I? I'm not making a documentary, but so then like that's how those images get in there, and then you start figuring out ways to intertwine it. And it seems like it's taking a documentary approach, but what it's mainly doing is it's letting the content produce the form, as opposed to, you know, imposing the form on the content, which is I think what most kind of fiction films naturally do.
Right, great. One thing that you did mention, we're talking about language, and I'm just seeing like intersections between documentary style and narrative style. Even in Nickel Boys, the way you parallel what's happening in the real world versus what's happening like in the academy, and it's like, what was the process with you and Jomo Frey, you know, trying to craft that visual language? I'm very curious. Did you have like specific lenses, you know, for Ethan, you know, and especially when you're doing the perspectives? So do you have a specific lens, you know, for Brandon? You know, could you just like walk us through like, you know, what that process crafting this, you know, new language? I know people have tried it before, you know, so it's Salt and Lake, but it's like it kind of works with this medium. It's like, how did you make it work? What are the pitfalls like avoided?
Yeah.
Say something?
No, I was just.
I was just thinking that would have been really cool if there was a specific lens for me and a specific lens for Brandon.
That's how it started.
Did it actually?
Yeah, but then you realized it wouldn't work.
Oh, Q&As, man. Wow.
Yeah. The original, and this is even before Jomo, like in the treatment that I gave to Plan B, like both of them are shot with long lenses, you know, 50s and 80s, and 90s, and actually a couple 500s and 300s in the boxing scenes. And originally we were going to, I was like, the pitch was, I operated as well as Jomo and Sam Ellison. The idea was for me to shoot Elwood and for him to shoot Brandon, and to let our separate camera languages be the languages of your vision, to shoot you with wide angle and shoot you with longer lenses. But immediately, just too confusing. And not in terms of process or production, but like, we're already asking the audience to like, let go and be part of your vision. And now we're gonna like be, you know, really messing with the depth of field and the field of view, alongside the archival, alongside all the other things. So we just shot them both the same.
Well, it also, shooting it the same was also helpful for the kind of like reveal as well. And that, because I know the first time I watched it, I started to get a bit disoriented and started asking myself, whose eyes am I looking through right now? So I think that would have been a lot more obvious if they were two. Oh, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
and it made sense at the end.
Yeah, it did work. It did work at the end. Yeah.
But real quick, we had a couple camera systems.
Sweet.
So Jomo Frey is a sort of master of information. He's just like a really brilliant dude. And I think one of the biggest challenges was just finding the proper setups for a point of view, right? Like how do you, as he says so well, we want the camera to be able to move like a human head does relatively. And sometimes that's over the shoulder when you're running forward, but if you want to like whip left and right, like that's not good for over the shoulder, So we shot it on a Sony Venice, in this thing called Rialto mode, which is super cool, where the camera basically breaks into two, and the front of the 6K camera is just the lens and a capture plane, and then it tethers to a larger body. So then there's another guy that's like 10 feet behind whoever's operating with the heaviest part of the camera, and then we basically had a handheld DSLR. So then we could do shoulder and handheld with that. We also had a mimic mode system where there was this like huge contraption that came in. Like my favorite one is when Ethan is, Elwood is against the wall when the cane gets poked on him. And he's like, pressed up against the wall with this like huge machine, almost like a jib craning over him with the camera head. And then no one else, like no actors, no lights or anything. And then we're all around the corner. And then I'm operating at that moment, at least the one that we used in the film. And I have this like screen and this like stick camera, and I'm like, and then it's moving Elwood's head. And so you're like just using his hands and stuff, but the head's moving, and that's us. And that was like a breakthrough for us to give us that mobility.
Because I was about to ask if Ethan and Brandon operated at any point in time, but this explains that.
Well, they did sometimes, because that was just one of the systems. You guys want to talk about operating a little bit? I mean, you're asking the questions. I don't want to.
No, it's fine.
Right.
The point is to have the conversation going. So I love it. Ethan?
I got to wear the Snorri rig sometimes, which was that camera that's behind David Diggs' head the entire film, and I don't know what else to say about it. It's like attached to your abdomen here. You have this kind of counterweight, but it's like plates here to counteract the camera that's behind your head, and it's weird. I mean, David talks about it quite intellectually, his experience getting to see the monitor and figuring out like what your shoulder movements might express and like your emotion, and it's fascinating.
But that was a custom rig too, because the Snorri cam is only used facing forward up, and for really small cameras. It's in like Requiem for a Dream, and what's the one Scorsese film, Wolf of Wall Street maybe? Like Jonah Hill's running around like crazy or something like that, and it's pointing up. But and those are for smaller cameras, but our camera's a lot heavier, even though it's on Rialto mode. So Jomo basically had to invent with his crew like a rig system that could support the weight, and then we wanted to put it behind him, and so all of that stuff was just actual invention or modification.
Was that also a Venice that was on that mode?
Yeah.
Wow.
And see, normally it would be another camera because the camera is too big, but we wanted to maintain the same fidelity. Yeah.
Makes sense. Great.
What I wore was not that. It was like a rig. It was a vest that went around my torso, and then they hooked the camera up on it right in front of me on my chest. So used it a few times. I think I haven't seen the movie in a little bit, but the one scene where I remember we were doing it is where Elwood is reading Pride and Prejudice, and Turner's listening to like the baseball game on the radio, and that like there's a little kind of choreography involved in like moving the book a certain way and having my hands a certain way, and it was just really fascinating because it's a scene that we're doing as well, and you kind of have to ignore the fact that there is a camera hanging off of your chest and like changing focus as when you put the book down. But it was just a cool opportunity to kind of step into the role of the camera operating.
Awesome. Yeah, great. So we'll be opening up for questions. The mic is there, and just try to keep it brief. But I have like 2 more questions to ask, if we can. I think
Now's the time to leave, or else you must stay. Save yourself. Just kidding, you guys.
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. No, respect. I mean, people got things to do.
Unfortunately, we won't be able to have time for audience questions. The guests have to leave at 9, so that's very unfortunate. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right, so sorry about that. So,
We see who's really with us.
yeah.
We see. Appreciate it. Just kidding.
Down here. I think the last question, I would ask is like the process of making this film. What was anything interesting that you found, about yourselves, and throughout making the film as well that was surprising, and we can go around the table just to share.
Oh, sure. Well, I need to probably get the last part. What's something about ourselves?
Like while making the film, that was surprising, that you found interesting while making the film, and also did you discover anything about yourself? Delve into these characters, especially how sensitive the topic is.
I think something that I guess I discovered about myself while working on it is that I'm capable of doing something like this and stepping into a role like this, and being able to really, breathe life into a character in a way that is honest, in a way that and in a way that an audience can receive it and be affected by it. Not to say that confidence wasn't present before, but while you're doing it and while you talk to people and they talk to you about your experience with watching it, it changes how you kind of, it changes that confidence a bit. It kind of goes from believing in yourself to knowing that you are capable of doing it. So something I discovered while doing it and kind of during this whole process. And I don't know. Other than that, it was just a joy to make this and to spend time with these guys, with the other members of the cast, with the crew. It was an incredible opportunity to be a part of something special with special people, and now I know what that not to say I know what that feels like now, and it's a really incredible feeling, and yeah, I'm gonna be chasing one like this for a little while, I'm sure.
Great. Brandon?
I think there's a lot of, just special aspects of making this film. I think Ethan touched on some of them. I think the biggest one is having someone like RaMell directing. I haven't done a lot of films before this, but I don't know, there's something about having someone who shows up as like a complete person. Like, I don't know, I've experienced different directors that maybe show up and they kind of put on their director hat and it feels very professional. And it feels kind of like, they always feel kind of at a distance and kind of unavailable to you. But I think RaMell felt very, like who you see here is who we had on set. We had someone who was full of joy, full of life, full of, yeah, he just created an atmosphere that made it safe for us to explore these things, and he never had any doubt in this idea to like film it in this way, like in this trust that he put in me and Ethan to explore and be vulnerable. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's what was special about it. Yeah, having someone like that give you just this wide open space to show up completely as you are.
That's important.
Yeah, that's really kind. Thanks, B. Thanks, E.
Exactly that. And how was it? How was the experience for you working with them and the rest of the crew to make this special film?
Yeah, I think, I was gonna make a joke, but I was like, that's bad time. Very serious. Yeah, I mean, separate from working with these two, it's interesting to have like a high concept, and just have it come alive and become something that's practical and didn't die in the conceptual space. And there was a possibility for that. Like if these two and Ingenue didn't show up in the way that you saw they did, then no matter how good and well thought out the writing, the script, and the shots were, then it just wouldn't work. And you wouldn't even know it was necessarily the acting. You know, like the acting it fills in all the other gaps. It's like, it makes everything alive. And you know, you never know like when films are good or films like aren't good or the films just don't rise to whatever occasion. It's nearly impossible to pinpoint that because it's alchemy. You know, it's a chemistry. Like I like to say that like films conspire, the universe conspires against films being made. You know, they're super unnatural. And yeah, having these guys and Ingenue do the thing even better than the idea itself, because you know it's kind of hard to dream in utopian. You can dream in the thing, but it needs to be bigger than that. Because if it's not bigger than that, then it's basically limited by what you thought. I think, and so that was a joy. But I will say also, there's something about this concept and it trying to approach the complexity of the world and try to approach the complexity of race and being looked at as race and being looked from as race, but that not being what it's about necessarily, that just being part of the process and the experience, but the images attempting to be or approach the complexity of what it means to look in the world and for the film form to approach something that feels like a wandering, you know, self-producing consciousness that is like pulling from memories and pulling from, you know, lived experience, that I think I'm really proud of, because it's really difficult to have something with so many ideas coalesce. And we found a way to do it with first the actors making the alchemy malleable, and then with like Nick Monser in the edit, we came close enough to what you see to have it feel like something, and so it's just great.
It's amazing to have an idea. It's a rarity, so I'll say congratulations and all the best throughout the run. I know it's in cinemas 3 days from now, and also please tell a friend if you enjoy the film to come to the film. Thanks for joining us tonight, and thank you, RaMell, Ethan, and Brandon. Have a good night.
Thank you.